Right, so as I mentioned, October this year marks the 125th anniversary of William Morris's death. And so it's timely for this month's talk to explore the Society's fascinating collection of obituaries of this remarkable polymath. And these obituaries are actually within this album in the Society's collection. And they consist of newspaper cuttings very carefully collected from a large range of national newspapers. And I've got a couple of examples to show you here of what they look like. We don't know the person who actually cut these out. As with many objects from the William Morris's Society, they were given to us by Mrs. Helena Stevenson, who owned Kelmscot House and also gave the house very generously to the Society, almost like a ready-made museum she handed over. But obviously these were taken at the time, so we don't quite know where she acquired these obituaries from. From poetry to politics, Morris's myriad interests and talents were covered in numerous tributes in both the national and international press, making for really absorbing reading. And in our talk this morning, we're going to look at the events surrounding Morris's death, the incidents leading up to his final day, the people who were present at his bedside at Kelmscot House, the journey from Hammersmith to Kelmscot, and the actual funeral itself. Morris's great dynamism began slowing down a couple of years before his death, with friends noticing that his country walks were getting shorter and his fishing trips briefer. His final political speech was for the Social Democratic Federation's meeting on the 3rd of January, 1896. And his very last speech of all was at the meeting for the Society of the Arts on the 31st of January that year. However, Morris continued with his writing, both poetry and his final novel, The Thundering Flood, as well as continuing with the ornamentation of his last great achievement of the Kelmscot press, the Kelmscot Chaucer, which we see here. Morris was referred to a doctor in February who spoke of his concerns regarding Morris's diabetes. Morris's diary records that he said he often felt seedy, and his close friend Emery Walker attended to him regularly. Morris's enormous energy was beginning to fade, and he began losing weight. Morris's health continued declining, diabetes having taken hold. He sought rest at Folkestone, hoping that the sea air would benefit him, returning to London in July, although unfortunately little improved. Subsequently, his doctors recommended a 4-week cruise to Norway to improve his health, but it was to have the opposite effect. Morris said he hated the voyage back and was relieved to return home. One of his doctors warned that his condition was becoming critical, with congestion of the lung, and this turned out to be TB, tuberculosis. Morris was now too ill to make the trip to his beloved Kelmscot Manor, and from August he remained almost housebound at Kelmscot House in Hammersmith. Fiona McCarthy, in a great biography of Morris, refers to him in his final days as failing mentally, suffering from loss of memory, and disturbed with wild hallucinations, which Morris himself called the screaming horrors and nocturnal fantasies. Mary de Morgan, the sister of William de Morgan, became Morris's nurse, and in September, Morris made a new will. Morris asked Sidney Carlisle Cockerell if he and Emery Walker wished to continue the work of the Kelmscot press, but they both agreed it was better that the press closed in its glory. After all, William Morris was the Kelmscot press. In his final days, Morris was visited by many of his close friends, including Cockerell, Georgiana and Edward Burne-Jones, Mary de Morgan, F.S. Ellis, Philip Webb, and Emery Walker, in addition to his family. And one of Morris's final letters was to his close friend Georgiana, when he wrote simply, "Come soon, I want a sight of your dear face." Poignantly, Morris's very last recorded letter on the 14th of September was to his eldest daughter Jenny, who he had been too ill to visit at Kelmscot Manor. It ended, "I believe I am somewhat better. Your most loving father." And by the end of September, Morris's breathing was becoming laboured and he was wandering and restless. The day before he died, Edward and Georgiana Burne-Jones visited, although sadly he now failed to recognise them. Philip Webb came in the evening and Emery Walker sat with Morris through the night. The next morning, Jane, May, Georgiana, Mary de Morgan and Detmar Blow were with Morris when he died peacefully after a period of unconsciousness at 11:15 on the 3rd of October. He died on the day that his romance, The Well at the World's End, was published. And here we have Morris on his deathbed, drawn by Charles Fairfax Murray. Later that day, Philip Webb, Cornwall Price and John Carruthers, who had accompanied Morris on his recent journey to Norway, arrived at Kelmscot House. Edward Burne-Jones was devastated by his great friend's death, and Philip Webb said that he had felt he had lost a buttress. One of Morris's sisters, Henrietta, said, "The world is different in every way now to me, and I feel lost and utterly alone." Interestingly, McHale, who was to become Morris's biographer, quoted his family doctor as saying, "I have no hesitation in saying he died a victim to his enthusiasm for spreading the principles of socialism." However, others were more positive in regards to Morris's politics, with the socialist Robert Blatford writing, "I cannot help thinking that it does not matter what goes into the Clarion this week, because William Morris is dead. He was our best man, and he is dead." The resolution of the Lancashire branch of the Social Democratic Federation stated, "Comrade Morris is not dead. There is not a socialist living would believe him dead, for he lives in the hearts of all true men and women still, and will do so till the end of time." So there are just a few of the interesting tributes I researched, but now moving on to the Society's collection of our tributes. In his obituary, Richard Le Gallienne, the author and poet, wrote, "Personally, I shall never forget the sense of exquisiteness and mystery with which the first sight of a Morris wallpaper stirred me." And of Morris's Kelmscot Press books, he wrote, "They have certainly recaptured some of the lost dignity, revived for us some of the unguarded wonderfulness of books. Surely it can now, it would be hard to find a parallel for a life filled with so vast, so varied, and so exquisite a productiveness." The anonymous obituary in the Observer read, "The death of William Morris leaves England poorer by the loss of a most original, interesting, and gifted personality. Poet, artist, archaeologian, and socialist, his influence was necessarily wide, and his popularity all but universal." The tribute goes on to cover Morris's achievements in literature, socialism, and innumerable lectures on art, as well as training the taste of the public in the direction of artistic decoration of their homes. The change that has taken place in the public feeling for ornament in the 35 years since he took the matter in hand is indeed astonishing. Its influence on present-day decorative art has been incalculable. In 1868 came the first volume of a political masterpiece, The Earthly Paradise. Some of the tales are familiar, but never more beautifully told. Andrew Lang, in reviewing their edition of Morris's collected works by Longmans, gave the following tribute to Morris's genius. To all who desire the restoration of beauty in modern life, Mr. Morris has been a benefactor almost without example. Indeed, did space permit and were adequate knowledge mine, Mr. Morris's poetry should have been criticised as only a part of the vast industry of his life in many crafts and many arts. His place in English life and literature is unique as it is honourable. He has done what he desired to do. He has made vast additions to simple and stainless pleasure. An anonymous obituary in the Weekly Times and Echo said that by the death of William Morris, we have lost the second of the three great men who have most influenced the world for good during the second half of the century. After Carlyle and Ruskin, and it goes on to say, but in some respects, Morris did more than either of them. A poet of the first rank, an artist whose creative fancy has made our English households homes of beauty instead of chambers of art horrors. Our master in art, there was no harder working man, the reviver of the lost art of Caxton. All there was William Morris to the world, but to some of us he was so much more. He opened our eyes so that whereas we were blind, now we see. And in his simple human life, so free from pedantry, so full of healthy interests, so fired with enthusiasm, and yet so sanely practical, we saw mirrored the future of England when this tyranny of brutalizing toil and greed is overpast. The Daily Mail, under the heading Socialist Poet and Art Worker, wrote, "The last of the great 19th century poets has been taken from us. In almost every trace of Morris's, in every house in England, it is no exaggeration to say that there exists something which shows a trace of Morris's work. By his labours in the art world, by his unwearied exertions towards raising a true idea of beauty as applied to decoration, and inspiring the feeling in every workman that whatever he produced should bear the stamp of. To Mr. Morris we owe our rescue from the wax flowers under a glass case, the antimacassar on the horsehair chair, the glaring paper on the wall, and a host of other things that make one shudder. His influence has spread far and wide, and therefore there are today monuments to him in every sheet of wallpaper, in almost every article of furniture, in carpets and tapestries, etc. Mr. Morris's motto, as regards all decorative work, was that our workmen must become artists and our artists workmen." The author of the Athenaeum's obituary mentions that each time that I saw him, he declared, in answer to my inquiries, that he suffered no pain whatever. And a comforting thought this is to us all, that Morris suffered no pain. At the last interview but one that I had with him, it was in the little carpetless room from which so much of his best work was turned out. He himself surprised me by leading the conversation upon a subject he rarely chose to talk about, the mystery of life and death. The conversation ended with these words of his: "I have enjoyed my life, few men more so, and death in any case is sure." It is difficult to think that the cause of causes of his death was excessive exercise in all of his forces, especially of the imaginative faculty. When I talked to him, as I often did, of the peril of such a life of tension as his, he pooh-poohed the idea. "Look at Gladstone," he would say. "Look at all those wise owls, your chancellors and your judges. Don't they all live the longer for work? It is rust that kills men, not work." The author of some more reminiscences wrote of Morris, "His death is a national loss. His bluff, genial, hearty manhood, his sublime gift of song, his ardent cult of the beautiful, make his place well nigh impossible to fill. George Bernard Shaw, in his reminiscence, William Morris as a Socialist, said, Morris was a very great man, absolutely open and upright. He never pretended to be what he was not. His latest important act in the socialist movement was to try to unite all the socialist parties into a single party. And he was certainly the best man for the purpose, since, as it happened, the one thing upon which the societies were agreed was a deep regard and respect for him. There was only one man in the movement who could really take in Morris, and that was Morris himself. The Anonymous Obituary in the Daily News wrote, William Morris thought that nothing was worth doing till it could be done as a joy to the doer, calling forth his best of every faculty. He goes on to describe the undertaking at Merton Abbey. To have succeeded in it, as he succeeded, places him among the great industrial reformers. Mr. Ruskin had spoken the great word, and here was that word translated into great deeds. Death has stopped him, or where would he have stopped? Every craft he touched, he lifted into an art. In socialism, he was not so much a leader as a spiritual influence. He had lived the creed rather than expounded it. And in that sense of the phrase, never has there been a better socialist than the poet and craftsman whose loss we have to deplore today. The day after Morris's death, Wilfred Scarwin Blunt came and saw Morris's coffin in his bedroom on the ground floor of his riverside home at Kelmscot House. The coffin was very plain, with a wreath laid on it by the Arts and Crafts Exhibition Society, which bore the following sonnet by Morris's great friend, the illustrator, artist, and fellow socialist, Walter Crane, who designed this membership card. How can it be that strong and fruitful life hath ceased, that strenuous but joyful heart, that craftsman in the loom of song and art, that voice by beating seas of hope and strife, to lift the soul of labour from the knife, who strove 'gainst greed of factory and art, ere the morning must he too depart. While yet with battle cries the air is rife, blazon his name in England's book of gold, who loved her and who fought her legends fair, woven in song and written in design, the wonders of the press and loom, a shrine beyond death's chilling hand, that shall unfold in life's house beautiful, a spirit rare. Other wreaths were sent from many societies and individuals and were placed in the coach house, which had been used for socialist meetings Sunday after Sunday for many years. Letters of sympathy arrived from all over, far distant places in every post. One of the first telegrams was from the socialist John Burns, and the socialists of Milan telegraphed their regret at the great loss of the immortal Morris. As a concession to Morris's well-known objection to formalities, the blinds of the house were not drawn, as was the custom of the day. The Westminster Gazette of the 6th of October, 3 days after Morris's death, had a notice entitled, "The late William Morris, the poet's characteristic funeral." It recorded that, shortly after 8 o'clock, the friends of the dead poet began to gather at the house at Hammersmith. No invitations had been sent out, but inquirers had been told of the hour of departure from the house and from the station at Paddington. Many of those who came were members of the staff of the Kelmscot Press, comrades of the Hammersmith Socialist Society, and working men of the neighbourhood. The intimate friends of the family were admitted to the death chamber. The expression on the dead poet's face was perfectly peaceful. In the evening, the coffin was closed. The coffin lay, as I've mentioned, in the front room on the right of the entrance, the book-lined study in which the master, as they quoted, passed away peacefully on Saturday. It was an oak coffin, unpolished, just as it came straight from the plane. And this is all quotes now from the Westminster Gazette. Instead of the hideous modern shoulders, it had the straight medieval shape. The handles of wrought iron, made by a blacksmith, were quite simple in design. There was no brass nameplate, but an inscription was cut into the wood, 4 lines in plain Roman letters, admirably carved. It read, William Morris, born March 24th, 1834, died October 3rd, 1896. The coffin was covered by 2 pieces of brocaded velvet. On the reverse side of one of them, a little piece of paper fastened to a corner described it in the poet's handwriting as made in Brusa, Anatolia, in the early part of the 17th century and Persian art. The funeral took place on a cold, wet, blustery day. Morris's friends assembled at 8:15 at Kelmscot House and followed the hearse along Rivercourt Road to the station. Fellow socialists, including John Burns and Hindman, were among the mourners, as were workmen from the Kelmscot Press. The mourners then travelled from Paddington to Lechlade, which is around 3 miles from the village of Kelmscot, where Morris was to be buried. But when they got to Paddington, more people were waiting on the platform, including representatives of the Polish, Russian, and Jewish socialist societies, and their wreaths were also added to the coffin. Others in the group of around 40 mourners were Morris's neighbours, William Blake Richmond and his wife, F.S. Ellis, the publisher, Walter Crane, John Carruthers and his daughter Amy Tozer, Sidney Cockerell, Morris's secretary, the author Henry Virtue Tebbs, the politician Cunningham Graham, the artist Arthur Hughes, and Morris's sister-in-law Bessie Burden. Jane and May travelled on the train along with Edward Burne-Jones, Emery Walker and Cornell Price, their great friends. Single horse carriages met the train when it reached Lechlade, but there also was a special farmer's harvest cart, painted yellow with red wheels and covered with willow boughs and vine leaves, driven by Detmar Blow. Arthur Hughes described it as one of the prettiest sights and like a page out of one of his own stories. 4 local men placed the coffin on this cart, on which was laid a laurel wreath and Morris's Brusa brocade. Others who joined the mourners here were Jenny Morris, Henry Halliday Sparling, Morris's sisters Henrietta and Isabella, and 2 of Morris's brothers, together with arts and crafts colleagues, workmen from the Oxford Street shop and Merton Abbey, as well as locals. This good attendance was despite the distance from London and the very poor weather. The Reverend William Fulford Adams, an old friend of Morris's, took the funeral services at St. George's Church, Kelmscot, which was decorated for the Harvest Festival. The Kelmscot Church was described by the Daily News as altogether not an unfitting place of rest, it will be seen, for the artist who hated restoration as one of the worst forms of modern vandalism, and who did so much by pen, purse, and example for the preservation of ancient monuments. That is the only obituary in the Society's collection to actually refer to Morris's work for the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings. Farm labourers, not traditional undertakers, placed Morris in his final resting place. Wreaths and flowers followed Morris's coffin into the grave, the gravestone of which was designed by Philip Webb. And as you can see, Jane Morris was to follow him, and then their 2 daughters, May and Jenny, are also buried here in the churchyard at Kelmscot. After the funeral, the Morris and Burne-Jones families went to Kelmscot Manor, and the remaining mourners had lunch at the inn at Lechlade before returning to London by train that afternoon. I'd like to end with the often quoted tribute from one of Morris's doctors, who famously said that Morris died having done more work than most 10 men, and the disease is simply being William Morris. Well, thank you very much for joining us to commemorate William Morris's special anniversary and to remember a truly remarkable man. So thank you very much for being with us this morning. And I hope that wasn't too sad a talk today, but I think it's just so interesting to read all those amazing tributes from various people and to follow Morris on his last days. So if anybody has any questions at all, I'll certainly do my best to answer them. If people want to type into the chat box again, and thank you very much for all those who have typed in where they're from. We've got, again, a great variety of people from this country and abroad, so it's wonderful to see so many people joining us, no matter where you are. And I'll just wait a little bit to see if anybody has any questions at all. Well, thank you very much for those people who have written in. Thank you very much. I'm really pleased that you enjoyed the talk. Somebody's written in to say, Nicola has noticed that the Coach House Lecture Hall had chairs at the front, and then benches at the back. And why was that? I don't have a definitive answer for that. All I can say is that whenever I've seen that photograph, I wondered the same. Because I think actually on the stage itself, where the speakers actually gave their talk, I think there are actually Sussex chairs. So it almost seems like a little bit of a hierarchy. The speaker and Morris may have got the Sussex chairs on the actual platform, and then further down you've got the chairs and then the benches. So I can only, my theory is that those who entered the Coach House first to attend the Sunday evening lecture would have got to the front, a good space at the front of the lecture hall, and had a good seat with a back to it, and those that arrived a little bit later got to sit on the benches in the rest of the room. But that, as I say, that's my theory. I've not read anything to actually say why there's a difference there in the seating. And Sarah's asked, were there any particular readings or hymns at Morris's funeral? I haven't read of actual hymns taking place, but we do know that it was a religious funeral. William Fulford Adams, Morris's friend, from many years ago, took the service, and we do know a couple of the readings. There were Bible readings. I'm not sure if I have them to hand, but I could certainly let you know afterwards what they were, because one of the people who attended the funeral did make a note of that. So we don't have the full service, but we do know a couple of the short readings. The readings that are read out now at funerals, actually, probably more common popular Bible readings. Thank you to everybody writing in. Stuart has asked, was Philip Webb one of the mourners at Kelmscot? I didn't mention his name because I can't be 100% sure that he was at the funeral, although it must be so likely that he was. I can't imagine he would have missed his great friend's funeral. He went on to die 1915, so he was still in relatively good health. I don't see why he wouldn't have made the journey. He visited Morris, as I mentioned, on his last day. He was in frequent contact with him, but there's no actual record. When I've read all the accounts of all the mourners that were there at Kelmscot, his name isn't actually there, so I couldn't mention him, but I feel he must have been there. But unfortunately, I can't say 100% sure that he was. We've been asked whether any particular flowers at the funeral. No, I haven't actually read about that. The only things I've read is that because it was harvest time, obviously that was a harvest cart that Morris's coffin was taken from Lechlade Station to the church inn, as we've seen, and the church itself, St George's Church, was decorated for Harvest Festival, which I think was extremely appropriate. So we know there were harvest fruit and vegetables, possibly flowers of the season, decorating it as well for harvest time. And apart from that, we only know that there were many flowers and wreaths on Morris's coffin. I've mentioned the laurel leaves and the willow boughs that were covering the funeral cart, but we haven't got any record of what were in the other wreaths, just the one laurel wreath. I'm not sure of the actual other flowers that were there. Oh yes, somebody said no online booking in those days. Yes, yeah, we would have known for certain if Philip Webb had been there had you had prior booking. And I think, we've been asked, did the obituaries give equal space to his socialism as to his other activities, or was that rather neglected? Socialism was mentioned quite a lot in the obituaries that that society has. Socialism was mentioned in the great majority of them, and most of them were positive. I think I did mention at the very start Michael's reading from Morris's doctor, was a bit disparaging, but the other comments that we have, were upholding Morris's beliefs and said what a great socialist he was, how much he did for the socialist cause. So yeah, I'd say that the obituaries do give equal space, really. Although they do go into a lot of other details of his life and work, obviously, as well. But because we've got a cutting from George Bernard Shaw, which is obviously mostly about socialism, I'd say we've got quite a good representation of Morris's political tributes in there as well. And I think we might have got to the end of the questions there, and I'd just like to end by thanking everybody for joining us, and each and every one of you. I'm so grateful to you all for your support of the Society. It's a great privilege for me to be able to research the items in the Society's collection, and it's such a pleasure to be able to speak to you all, no matter where you are. And I should say a big hello to Martin in New Zealand. Thank you for joining us. I think it must be gone 11:30 at night where you are now. So thank you for staying up to watch this. And for your lovely everybody's comments. It's somebody's written he's an inspiration to socialists today. and people found it moving. And somebody's in Pennsylvania. It's 6:45 in the morning. Some people are up late or up early. So I do appreciate people taking the time to do that, to be with us this morning. And I should just mention that our next event, actually, the Society's next event is on the 6th of November, as well as our half-term workshops. But the next event is the Kelmscot Press Symposium on the 6th of November. So I think hopefully we might see some of you at that. So please do have a look at our website for all our events, our learning events and our standard lecture series, because it's lovely to see everybody there. And I'd just like to end by saying a big thank you for your support again, and I look forward to seeing you at next month's Coffee with a Curator, which is going to be celebrating another anniversary, which is the anniversary of Morris & Company, 160th anniversary this year. So we're going to be looking at the history of Morris starting the company and going on to present times, how it's changed throughout its great 160-year history. So thank you very much, and hopefully see you again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.